Major networks descended on Meadow Creek, filming me among the battered fences, referencing the suspect 1985 deed, Grandpa's tapes, and talk of a decades-old conspiracy. Local politicians who once praised Karen now scrambled to separate themselves, rummaging through old meeting minutes to dodge accusations of complicity. Karen tried hosting short press events, labeling me an opportunist exploiting a family tragedy, but each denial only stoked the media's curiosity. Residents in older developments recounted parallel experiences, sudden fees, veiled threats, and questionable signatures. It all pointed to a meticulously orchestrated scheme that was finally meeting resistance. I pictured Karen prowling her pristine living room, nails digging into her palms each time a nightly news broadcast aired fresh allegations. She thrived on controlling narratives behind closed doors. Yet here we were, exposing every tactic on camera. Realizing her advantage was slipping, Karen's lawyers filed a frantic motion declaring Grandpa's tapes inadmissible and the 1931 survey unreliable. The judge set a special hearing. The courthouse thronged with reporters and locals carrying signs like "Protect Family Farms" and "Stop HOA Tyranny." Karen arrived, chin jutted high, eyes sparking with offended pride. Her attorneys repeated claims of illegal recordings and irrelevant antique maps. Harold responded with an audio forensics expert certifying the tapes were genuine and an archivist who confirmed the 1931 survey's authenticity. The judge, unimpressed by Karen's protests, reaffirmed the injunction, halting Sunnydale's expansions. Karen's composure shattered visibly, her cheeks reddened, fists clenched at her sides, voice cracking with frustration. She stormed out as the press clamored for a reaction. In that charged moment, it felt like Grandpa's land was safe for another day, defended by the truth he helped uncover. Though the final legal verdict lay in the future, Karen's once unstoppable assault had met an immovable barrier. If you found this saga meaningful, please subscribe, tap that like button, and share where you're from in the comments. Even in the quiet corners of the countryside, one determined stand can peel back layers of corruption and honor the ancestors who first tilled these fields, sowing not just seeds but everlasting hope. I almost screamed when I heard the bulldozers ripping into my grandfather's farmland. My heart pounded so fiercely I feared it might burst, my mind whirling with questions. How dare anyone trample the only inheritance Grandpa left me? These gently rolling hills, endless horizons, and fertile rows were my childhood refuge. Sun-drenched mornings battling weeds, blistering summer noons hauling crates of vegetables, crisp autumn twilights hearing leaves crunch underfoot. Now, a local HOA juggernaut named Karen Parker believed she could claim my family's legacy with a flimsy stack of official documents. Not if I had any say in it. Before we plunge into this tension-packed saga of hidden deals and shocking revelations, please make sure you're subscribed, tap that like button, and comment where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't guess how ferocious this conflict becomes, or how a determined community can topple even the most iron-fisted bully. It was almost midnight when my phone blasted me out of a restless half-sleep. Mrs. Bailey, Grandpa's neighbor for decades, practically yelled into my ear, "Alex, I'm sorry it's late, but you need to come right now. Bulldozers have been roaring through your grandpa's field since dawn, and they keep insisting the property is theirs." My grandfather, Joe Miller, passed away only 3 months ago, leaving me 200 acres of precious farmland. The idea that an HOA could swoop in and declare themselves owners felt absurd. My heart pounded as I tossed clothes into a duffel, ignoring how my hands trembled. I recalled Grandpa's voice, calm yet firm whenever the subject of farmland came up. "Land isn't just dirt, Alex. It's family history. You protect it like your ancestors did, or you lose more than just a crop." Speeding down a deserted highway under a waning moon, I pictured flattened fences, swirling dust, and monstrous machinery devouring rows of corn. I gripped the wheel tighter. "Hang on, Grandpa," I murmured to the darkness. "I'll fight for this place the way you taught me." Would I arrive too late to salvage the farm he spent his life defending? The farmland, once a sanctuary of stability, now felt like a war zone bracing for the final blow. When I finally turned onto the gravel driveway at dawn, the sight almost knocked the air from my lungs. Tire ruts gouged the earth, Fence posts lay shattered like scattered bones, and towering signs screamed, "Sunnydale Estates, luxury living." In a matter of hours, our tranquil family farm had been transformed into a construction site. Bulldozers loomed like mechanical monsters, ready to devour every inch of greenery. A sleek white SUV bearing an HOA emblem stood near the old barn. Leaning against it was Karen Parker, neat blazer, hair styled flawlessly, her posture radiating unshakable confidence. She spoke with a worker in a low but intense tone, then turned as she spotted me. Her eyes glittered with an unsettling mix of triumph and impatience. Mrs. Bailey stood a short distance away, relief crossing her face when she saw me. "Oh, Alex," she breathed. "Thank goodness you're here. They tore the fence down without so much as a warning. I tried to protest, but Karen threatened me with trespassing charges. Can you believe that?" My stomach churned. "She's got no right," I said. "This land belonged to Grandpa for decades." I glanced at Karen, who stared right back with a thin-lipped smile. It felt like a silent dare. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice in my head again. "Bullies only win when you fold. Show 'em your backbone, and they'll think twice." Inside the farmhouse, reminders of Grandpa filled every corner. Old quilts draped over chairs, photos of harvest festivals taped to the walls, and that faint smell of pipe tobacco lingering in the hall. Mrs. Bailey followed me in, arms wrapped around herself. "I can't believe they're doing this," she whispered, eyes darting to the window. I exhaled a shaky breath. "Karen claims she has permits or something. If there's some crooked paperwork, I need our own documents to fight it." Together, we tore through closets, cupboards, and dusty trunks until the sun climbed higher. Eventually, I headed upstairs into the attic, rummaging through a forest of labeled boxes. Crop yields, equipment repairs, tax records. Finally, in a battered envelope marked Old Surveys and Maps, I found a 1931 boundary map revealing that Miller Farm extended far beyond what current records said. Grandpa had scribbled in the margin, "1985 shift? Fraud? Who changed lines?" My throat tightened. Even in his final months, Grandpa sensed something off. "He tried to warn me," I muttered aloud. Mrs. Bailey set a hand on my shoulder. "He'd want you to see this through, Alex," she said softly. "I remember him muttering about shady folks wanting his land." Folding the map, I felt a renewed surge of determination. No flimsy development plan could override Grandpa's blood, sweat, and tears. Not if I had anything to say about it. Early the next morning, I found a jarring orange notice pinned to the farmhouse door, labeling me a trespasser and ordering me to vacate my own land. A tide of fury boiled up in my chest, my fists clenching around the paper as I read the bogus claims. Karen's name reappeared in official stamps, mocking any protest I might raise. Desperate, I phoned every attorney in Meadow Creek. Most offered perfunctory rejections. Eventually, I reached Harold Green, a semi-retired lawyer known to hate bullies. We arranged a quick meeting in his cluttered office. He adjusted his glasses as I unfurled the 1931 boundary map and showed him Grandpa's scrawled notes, hinting at a suspicious 1985 deed. "This looks serious," Harold said, rubbing his chin. "If that newer deed is forged, we can file for an injunction to buy time. But we'll need more than a single old survey." My pulse hammered at the idea of halting Karen's bulldozers. Then Grandpa's words rang in my head. "Taking a stand isn't easy, but it's the only way you keep what's rightfully yours." I found my voice. "I won't let them bulldoze Grandpa's land without a fight," I said. Harold offered a curt nod. "Good. Let's gather all the ammo we can." Returning to the farmhouse, I remembered Grandpa's offhand remarks about hiding important stuff in places no one would think to check, like the root cellar. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. If he went to such lengths, he must have been terrified of someone finding what he had. I grabbed a crowbar and pried up a loose floorboard near the pantry, my breath hitching as a battered trunk emerged from the darkness. It was heavier than I expected, coated in decades of dust, its hinges rusted but still functional. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid, revealing an assortment of letters, black and white photos, and a slim notebook titled Boundary Mystery. Leafing through its yellowed pages, I saw references to a developer named Evergreen, rumored bribes to county officials, and ominous notes about Karen's father. Grandpa's handwriting shook with anger, describing surprise fees, bogus boundary checks, and the same intimidation I was now facing. "These people won't stop until they steal every last acre," he'd penned on one page. The ink smudged as if he'd gripped the pen too tightly. Tucked at the bottom of the trunk, I found an old tape recorder and a few labeled cassettes, one marked 1985 County Deal in Grandpa's sharp script. My pulse spiked. Could this be a recording of Karen's father orchestrating his scheme? I snapped pictures and texted them to Harold, my heart thumping. If this Evergreen was the same shady root behind Karen's claim, we might prove a decades-long scheme. I imagined Karen's smug father pacing these fields decades ago, hatching plans she now gleefully continued. That thought made my blood boil. Grandpa had fought this battle alone, but I wouldn't let his legacy be erased without a fight. Harold insisted we find official backup for Grandpa's revelations, so we headed to the county archives, a musty, government-owned building with flickering lights and an endless warren of filing cabinets. The place reeked of stale paper and bureaucracy, the kind of place where secrets could be buried for decades, unnoticed. The clerk at the front desk barely glanced at us until we requested records on Miller property adjustments, 1980-1990. "Ain't got much on that," she muttered, frowning as she scrolled through the system. Her fingers hesitated before she finally retrieved a thick folder and slid it across the counter. The hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Inside, a 1985 deed indicated that large portions of Grandpa's land had transferred to Evergreen Development, the very name Grandpa cursed in his notes. My stomach clenched as I traced my finger over the signature line where Grandpa's name had been scrawled. Something felt off. The alleged signature looked shaky, unlike his usual bold scrawl. "This screams forgery," Harold murmured, flipping to another page. "A handwriting expert could confirm it. If it's fraudulent, Karen's on dangerous ground." I nodded, but something else bothered me. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a small notation in the margins. The initials KP appeared next to an approval stamp. Karen Parker? My gut told me it wasn't a coincidence. The clerk fidgeted, scanning the hallway as though expecting Karen to leap out. Her fingers drummed against the counter, her eyes darting toward the door. "That's all we got," she said, her tone a little too clipped. Before we could dig further, the overhead speakers crackled. "Attention all visitors. County archives are now closing early." Two uniformed guards sidled in, their stance rigid, their expressions blank. "Since when do archives close at 2 p.m.?" Harold muttered under his breath. We exchanged grim looks. Someone was pulling strings to keep us from unearthing more. As we left, I pictured Karen's victorious grin, convinced she'd blocked us. But she underestimated just how far I was willing to go. We had enough to suspect a major fraud, and that was just the beginning. At dawn the next day, heavy machinery roared again. Through the window, I glimpsed a truck labeled HOA Enforcement. Workers unrolled vivid orange fencing around the porch, driving stakes with methodical precision. A new sign declared, "Condemned, evacuate now." Anger flooded my veins. I rushed outside, demanding county authorization. One worker smirked, tossing me a pamphlet titled Sunnydale Building Standards. It felt like a theatrical performance with Karen as director. Sure enough, she stood nearby, arms crossed. Her eyes glowed with anticipation, as though savoring my frustration. Mrs. Bailey emerged from the farmhouse, tears in her eyes. "They can't do this, can they?" I shook my head, scanning the false condemnation notices. "They're counting on us not knowing our rights, but we'll fight back." Harold arrived, quietly pulling my arm before I could confront Karen head-on. Moments later, multiple envelopes appeared in the mailbox, each listing code violations with staggering fines. The pattern was clear. Karen wanted me entangled in so much legal red tape, I'd buckle. That afternoon, while I paced near the new chain-link fence, a nervous HOA security guard scurried up to me. "Check file 473B, County Archive," he whispered, shoving a slip of paper into my hand before fleeing. Harold and I hustled back to the archives, where the staff offered more pushback. Eventually, we accessed file 473B, and sure enough, it linked Karen's father to farmland reclassifications, ignoring Grandpa's repeated complaints. The staff practically herded us out again, babbling about early closure. Climbing into Harold's car, I exhaled in disbelief. All these files point to the same corrupt root. Karen's father built this scheme, she's just finishing it. Harold tapped the steering wheel. She didn't expect us to connect the dots, that's for sure. I pictured Karen learning we had fresh evidence. Perhaps she'd clench her fists, fury burning behind that pristine blazer. If she'd built her empire on lies, we were closing in on its crumbling foundations. Realizing a quiet legal fight might not suffice, I contacted Cassie, a local journalist famed for exposing hidden corruption. She arrived with a camera operator capturing footage of the battered farmhouse and the jarring condemnation signs. Mrs. Bailey recounted how Grandpa said he'd never sell to land sharks, and Cassie's expression darkened at the mention of hush money and suspicious boundary changes. "This could be the biggest land grab story Meadow Creek's ever seen," Cassie said quietly, flipping through Grandpa's older boundary map and notes. She interviewed me on camera, focusing on the 1985 deed fiasco and the possible forgery. "I'll run a detailed piece," Cassie promised, her tone steely with conviction. "People need to know about Karen Parker's strong-arm tactics." That evening, glancing out the window, I spotted a black SUV rolling down the road, tinted windows hiding whoever drove. I shivered. Sure, Karen was monitoring every step, but if she expected me to fold, she'd misjudged the grit Grandpa passed on to me. Around midnight, roaring engines and glaring floodlights shattered my shaky sleep. Workers in dark uniforms extended the chain-link fence deeper into the eastern fields, hammering metal stakes with ruthless efficiency. Their reflective vests shone in the harsh lights, a surreal tableau of farmland subjugated under corporate might. I stumbled onto the porch, phone in hand, demanding they stop. One man barked, "We have full HOA authorization," brandishing a crumpled form. My rage flared, but I lacked the raw power to halt them. They finished in under an hour, partitioning more of Grandpa's fields behind newly minted "no trespassing" signs. A text from an unknown number lit my phone right after. "Quit while you still can." I sank onto the steps, remembering Grandpa's unwavering resilience. He once told me, "If you don't defend what's yours, no one else will. Don't back down, even if they threaten everything." Karen's fear tactics only steadied my resolve. Harold and I suspected Grandpa left more than just scribbled notes and surveys. He'd often boasted about hiding secrets where city slickers wouldn't dare check, like the old barn's feed troughs. Poking around dusty corners, we eventually pried up a loose plank. Beneath it, we found a wooden box labeled 1985, Conversations. Inside were 2 cassette tapes and a note in Grandpa's crisp handwriting. "They think I'm too old to fight back. Let them believe it." My heart lurched. If these tapes recorded actual voices plotting forged deeds or manipulating boundaries, Karen's entire charade might crumble. Harold reminded me we'd need forensic analysis to confirm authenticity, but I felt a surge of vindication. I imagined Karen's face contorting in scandalized horror upon discovering we had more than just old maps. We had her father's actual words. Soon, a preliminary hearing was scheduled, drawing curious locals, a pack of journalists, and a small knot of Karen's supporters. She swept into the courthouse in a pristine suit, posture rigid, lips drawn in a semblance of confidence, yet her eyes darted, betraying tension. Karen's attorney ridiculed our 1931 boundary map as ancient rubbish and the tapes as stage props. Harold, unflinching, calmly outlined the older surveys, Grandpa's root cellar notes, and the suspicious 1985 deed. Then he requested the judge's permission to play brief snippets of Grandpa's tapes. In a hush, the cassette crackled, revealing disembodied voices discussing forging Grandpa's signature if he refused to sign, referencing intimidation tactics to break him financially. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Karen leaped to her feet, face reddening. "That's illegal wiretapping. You can't just—" The judge rapped the gavel, noting older consent laws might apply. Enough doubt was cast on Karen's official documents to warrant an injunction halting Sunnydale's expansion. Cameras flashed as Karen stormed out, ignoring reporters' shouted questions about fraudulent deeds. My heart pounded with a mix of triumph and relief, imagining Grandpa's approving nod. With the injunction in place, Bulldozers sat silent and caked in dust. Karen retaliated with waves of legal motions claiming emotional distress and vast financial losses. Meanwhile, local news featured interviews with homeowners who'd felt the brunt of Karen's dictatorial HOA, arbitrary fines, petty violations, and a suffocating atmosphere of fear. Public sympathy shifted quickly, painting Karen as an overreaching figure. Families who'd purchased lots in the new Sunnydale expansions cornered me with anxious questions, worried they'd lose everything. I reassured them my fight was about stopping fraud, not punishing unwitting homeowners. Karen's the real villain, I told them, not you. Neighbors often dropped by the farmhouse, sharing stories of Grandpa's kindness, helping with harvests, offering free seeds, mending broken gates. The difference between his generosity and Karen's iron grip couldn't be starker. Their recollections fortified my resolve. News of the dispute spiraled, culminating in an online petition that demanded a thorough probe into Sunnydale's methods. A group calling itself Friends of Miller Farm began holding protests at the half-built development, waving signs like "Land is family, not profit," and "Honor original boundaries." Rumors of hush money to commissioners and shady rezoning approvals circulated, linking back to Karen's father. Elderly locals recounted how Grandpa mumbled about a father-daughter duo who specialized in driving out rightful landowners. Now, the daughter's master plan faced a bright spotlight, and cracks were emerging. Sometimes at dusk, I stood by the battered boundary fence, remembering Grandpa's voice once more. "A farm's a living thing. You fight for it, same as you'd fight for kin." The chain-link enclosure might mar the fields, but the crowds of neighbors uniting against Karen gave me hope that we'd keep his land free from her clutches.